Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 news. After a very difficult weekend for Mercedes at the Singapore Grand Prix, they are looking to bounce back for Suzuka, but certainly are taking some positives away. George Russell believes this was arguably the first time this entire season they've really had a car actually capable of winning a race on merit. In the end, they were nowhere close, but definitely some confidence to be taken into Suzuka and beyond. Very much intrigued to your thoughts in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you are new as always. These were the words of Lewis Hamilton after the weekends. We'll keep our heads down, keep fighting and come back stronger in Japan. There are only now 5 races left in the season for Mercedes to try and get a win. They were oh so close with Lewis Hamilton here to getting another pole position this weekend. It looks like, especially given the fact that their race pace is usually better than quali, that they could be on course for a race victory this weekend. Of course, didn't work out that way for various reasons, one of which, of course, being Lewis Hamilton ending up in the wall. If he had a better start, was up into third, he believes that he would have been able to keep pace with the top 2 guys. Whether that's enough to win, who knows? Maybe some strategy could have been advantageous. Very difficult, of course, as it turned out, to overtake around Singapore, even with the new regulations. If, well, let's say Hamilton was third, completed a good overcut, let's say, on the other 2 guys, then, the win could potentially have been on. Now, George Russell also probably believes he had a winning car underneath him and was making some good progress, but of course was nowhere near being able to deliver, largely due to strategy and also Singapore being difficult to overtake, and of course a difficult qualifying and the new power unit he took before the weekend began. So very bad weekend for Mercedes on the whole. 9th and 14th, the 2 guys finished, but that does not mean there are no positives to take away. Hamilton was, let's just say, surprisingly upbeat, I think, after the race concluded. I think he was confident really all weekends. He knew he had something under him this weekend in qualifying, and then the race, of course, for various reasons didn't go his way. And I think he also mentioned the fact that that car, as it has proved to be so far this season, is a real handful in the wet. Like, the bumps at the best of times aren't great, added on to the fact that in the wet conditions with tyre warm up and the like, it's really not a particularly good car in those conditions. It made things difficult, right? And maybe if the race had been bone dry from start to finish, it could have been a different story, especially with Verstappen largely out of the picture and stuck behind many cars after the difficult start he had. But of course there were questions there, and this is what Hamilton said after the race. Obviously we started with a pretty decent weekend. I was trying to overtake, the lock up into turn 7, your heart sinks a little. I knew it was over from then, but these things happen. I'm not going to punish myself for the mistake. You get back up, you try again, etc, etc. Classic, Hamilton statements here. Wasn't the greatest day, I'll make the most of tomorrow. This I thought was rather interesting though, talking about the whole Sainz situation. Difficult start and then getting stuck behind Carlos. I don't know why he was so slow, and I really don't understand if anyone knows why Carlos was so slow, because he was looking pretty good all weekend in practice. Qualifying was okay, I think it was like 2/10 off Leclerc's lap for pole, and of course got a good start, was up to third, but then every single time the race restarted, Sainz was just nowhere to Leclerc. Like, honestly, the pace differential was probably a good, 6-7 tenths of a second per lap, Sainz to Leclerc, and every single time there was a restart, they would just pull away from Sainz. But Hamilton, of course, didn't have the pace around this circuit to get past Sainz, and then feels like he was really stuck behind him. He says, I was just not quick enough to get past him in these conditions, but I was just sitting behind him. I think I could have done similar times to the guys ahead, Perez, Leclerc, but being stuck behind him, I couldn't. If I'd have been third, I could have kept up with the guys ahead, he said. So that's a pretty interesting statement that Hamilton believes if he had have got Sainz, whether in, an overcut, an undercut, maybe in the pit stop, right? And that was why Hamilton, I'm sure, was so frustrated with his mistake, because if he didn't make that mistake, they were just about to go through the pit stop cycle to go onto the medium tyres. And if Mercedes made the right call, whether the undercut or overcut, i.e. coming in 1 lap earlier than Sainz or 1 lap later, either which way was the best strategy. It seemed like actually the overcut was the way to go. So let's say Ferrari did a Ferrari, brought Sainz in ahead of Hamilton. He then pushed really hard on those inters, and then obviously the outlap might be pretty tough for Sainz on the fresh slicks on the wet track. It's still kind of drying track. So there was a chance where that would have been Lewis up to third. Then, who knows, another safety car comes through for Tsunoda, and then the race is still very much on. But Hamilton believes there was potentially the car under him to do some damage in Singapore this weekend, despite the fact that going in, they were very concerned about the bumps on the track, really throwing off the ride height and the issues that they've had with that in the past, but were surprisingly close, I think, to getting the job done, at least in terms of qualifying pace. The race, for various reasons, went tragically wrong, and Russell echoed similar sentiments. He reckons they actually had the car to win this weekend. The only time they've really had a car at this level before was, I suppose, back in, Zandvoort, really, right, where they could have potentially pushed Verstappen for the win there, if not for all the safety car drama towards the end of that race. But, as he went on to say, we were very, very fast today. I think, had it not been for that incident with Mick, Mick, we would have finished inside the top 10 definitely. So, of course, his race was an absolute disaster as well. Pitting early for those slick tyres onto the mediums, struggling for about 10 laps or so before they finally started to work. I'm pretty sure Russell lost about 15 seconds a lap at a time to guys like Verstappen and Perez on those slick tyres when the circuit was not suited for it. Of course, they gave it a go, but once those tyres finally got up to temperature, and in fair play to Russell not bidding it in the wall, as many did given the difficult circumstances on those tyres, he really was making good progress through the field, and went on to say that he was asking actually for a new set of inters, but they said, well, if we give him a new set of inters, nothing's really going to happen here. We're just going to get stuck for a long period of time. So, I trust the team. They trust me. They thought it was time to go onto slicks and try something, so they gave it a go. Obviously, it didn't work out. But once they actually got the safety car restart and stuff, and he was able to catch up that time, he overtook 3 cars on one lap. I think we barely even saw this, and was up to P11 before the Mick Schumacher instance, which George still seems to think was Mick's fault. Not really sure why. We'll see a screenshot of it here in a second. But, as he goes on to say, so it goes both ways, but we had to try something. I think we showed we are making a lot of progress, and that gives me optimism for the rest of the year. And this was the other part of the statement, of course, that is worthy of mention. Firstly, confidence has been restored that we fixed the car today. Our normal pace was back, and we definitely had a car this weekend that was capable of winning. So that is one thing ticked off, let's say. So that is really the big question going into the last 5 races of the season. They looked pretty competitive here, apart from, the race was chaotic for many reasons, and it wasn't just the Mercedes guys that struggled, of course. Now, I just want to mention this because I'm surprised that George Russell actually seems to believe that it was Mick Schumacher's fault here, that he says he gave Mick plenty of space before their contact in Singapore. I kind of understand what Russell's getting at to some degree. This is, of course, going down here into turn 1, where George Russell and Mick Schumacher go side by side. Now, Russell, of course, wants to pull out to the right-hand side as far as he possibly can so that he can make the corner, but Mick isn't necessarily obliged to give him all that space, because if Mick just pulls over to the right and allows Russell to, come through and take the line as far to the right as he possibly can, then Russell has the cleanest possible line through the corner. Mick isn't necessarily obliged to give him that room, and Russell, of course, pulls over to the right here to try and take it, expecting, I guess, Mick to yield a little bit, given the fact that Russell already has so much space on his left that he could use. Of course, you want to be as far right as you can for the left-hander if you're trying to make the move happen, but he moves over to the right, makes contact with Schumacher, and then gets a puncture, of course, and that was pretty much Russell's race done and dusted at that point. But, he seems to believe that Mick should have given him more room. I don't really fully understand that, to be honest. We saw a similar thing in fairness, and this wasn't necessarily Russell's fault so much, but right at the start of the Silverstone Grand Prix, where the impact happened with Joe, and, of course, you guys know that instant now, when Gasly came through, and then Russell pulled over to the left because, well, he kind of had to pull over to make the corner to the right, and then the contact happens. Kind of a similar situation here, maybe, but I think this was Russell's fault for sure, but still, it would have been interesting if Russell had got past here cleanly, that we could have seen his pace in clean air, because he did set the fastest lap at the end by about 1.5 seconds, I think he had the fastest lap by, so they did have some pace. Now, whether there is enough pace to get second in the Constructors, that remains to be seen. There is now a big deficit between Ferrari and Mercedes, and there are 5 tracks left. Next, of course, up is Suzuka, then I believe it goes to Kota, then to Mexico, then to Brazil, and then, of course, to Abu Dhabi. So, well, Suzuka in Japan, it is definitely a kind of medium to high downforce circuit. There are a couple of straights, but also Sector 1 especially is kind of fast-flowing corners. The Mercedes have generally been quicker in some of the slower corners, which there aren't really that many. I mean, there are some, in fairness, in Suzuka, so look, who knows really how it's going to suit these cars, but at least it's not an absolute really low downforce Monza circuit where Mercedes are going to struggle, at least from their perspective. So the race is still on for seconds to some degree here. If Ferrari, do a Ferrari and the engines blow up or whatever the case might potentially be, but it's going to be a tough ask, right? But look, with 5 races to go, they are confident they have a car capable of winning. If it's capable of winning in Singapore, it might be capable of winning in Suzuka, purpose-built racetrack, great track. So, maybe there's a chance Mercedes are good there. Kota, there are a couple of straights, but it's not outrageous. So, again, Sector 1 is kind of similar there to, let's say, Maggots and Beckett's in Silverstone, or also Sector 1 in Japan. Then Mexico, there is a monster straight there. But the Sector 2 is pretty much just 90-degree corners where Mercedes seem to be pretty good around Singapore. So, honestly, who knows? Brazil again. So, a lot of the circuits are kind of higher-ish downforce circuits from now to the end of the year, where the Merc has been a bit better. So, with 5 races to go, can they get a victory? Of course, well, you guys can make your minds up in the comment section below. And just to finish out with this as well, because it's going to take, if Mercedes do want to win and get second in the Constructors, some help from the Ferrari boys. And I just thought this is quite the statement really here from pole to win ratios, with Charles Leclerc now joining winning the list for the worst pole to win ratios of any driver that's ever achieved one. But very much enjoyed your thoughts in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you are new. Take care, and I'll see you next time.